Sorry about that. Greetings to you all who have joined us for this very exciting, not also depressing subject of the policy dialogue today, looking at the cost and the extent of corruption in Zimbabwe. We have used a satirical title, "Where have all the goats gone?" If also because the story about the goats which disappeared, and with them the 87 billion or so, has tended to crowd out or disguise the other incipient type of corruption that's been going on, especially that related to the elections last year. So we are happy that many of you liked the satirical aspect of it, but a very serious subject. We have 4 eminent panelists, which I would, many of, we don't need any introduction, but all the same, Tendai Biti, the giant in our society, one who has been at the heart while in Parliament, former chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, and sadly and unceremoniously dumped out of Parliament. It's rumors being that there was a lot of play that led to that. But we're happy he's still around, prominent figure that he is, and a man who can match even the best of economists in our society. So you'll be our first speaker, and then we'll have Nick Donovan from Sentry, a man who has done enormous work in revealing some of the ins and outs of the corrupt deals in our society. And is speaking from London. We just voted for whichever party he did, I don't know. And then we have Chennai, a regular on this platform, also speaking from the UK, the diaspora, where, by the way, most of our participants on this platform are from the diaspora, thanks to Zoom. And then last but not least, Janet Jo, also no stranger to this platform. Without further ado, I would just want to say that when we talk about the scourge and cost of corruption, this is an understatement in the light of what social media in particular has helped to reveal and disclose about the extent of corruption. Someone said, why is called it official corruption? Because corruption is always corruption. It's true, but official was meant to highlight to the extent to which is state-related in many respects and involving state actors in key respects. And on the cost, apart from the quantum that is lost through corruption, we have to also talk about the possible political costs. Because as some of us have commented, this cannot end well at all. The scourge has been so serious. And for us to tackle the topic as we are doing is because it is something that glares in our face. And as social commentators, as political actors, we cannot stand by. We have to do something about it. And perhaps this is all we can do to help ventilate, expose, explain, in the hope that armed with knowledge and those able to do something about this can help us do so. In addition to our request, or rather our plea, which we have made long before, when I did the work on the Christmas scandal some years ago, whereas I insisted that we should not only condemn corruption, but you get the perpetrators to pay back that which they have taken. And so far, we have seen little or nothing of attempts to have these people who have stolen money, public funds, pay it back. And I think it's one of the things that we'd like to put on the table in this discussion. So I'll call Tendai BT to start first.
Good evening. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Very clearly, thank you.
All right. Excuse me, I'm in an area with poor network, so if I'm afraid that if I put my video and you can see my ugly face, the connection might cut. So if you may forgive me for that, but I can assure you, you won't miss my ugly face. So the issue of corruption in Zimbabwe has become so structural, it's become so embedded in the body psyche of this country. Under Mugabe, you knew that the sole purpose, the primary purpose of the regime was the power retention agenda, the reproduction of power and power at any cost, legally and extra-legally. And this so-called new dispensation, the primary cause for existence is extraction, is looting, is the bottom line. And the state and occupation of the state becomes a mere means to achieving and attaining the holy grail of accumulation. And if you look at the figures, some of which I'm going to outline, hopefully in my short presentation, this has become a pure capistocracy. This has become a parasitic a state that is cannibalizing the state assets, that is cannibalizing state resources. Every department, every ministry is involved in some illicit, activity. Upstream, downstream. It's so enhanced. It's so concrete. It's so structural. When you hear the Prosecutor General, Justice Matanda Moyo, saying that the government itself is losing around $1.6 billion US annually from corruption, that tells you that these are huge figures, because that 1.8 is in fact an understatement. And the fact that we are ranked 160 out of 100 countries on the Transparency Corruption Perception Index is frightening. There are traditionally 7 centers, what I would call commanding heights of looting in Zimbabwe, by what I've previously called the archbishops of corruption in this country. The first portal is fuel, which is traditionally a $2 billion US dollar industry, controlled essentially by 2 entities in this country. Then we have foreign, currency. The commodification of the US dollar makes it an inevitable source of corruption, and I'll give a few details on that. Number 3, and these things are not necessarily in order of importance, is of course our resources. We have world-class resources in the form of platinum, lithium, gold, chrome, and diamonds. And there's massive looting of these resources. If I speak of lithium, daily thousands of trucks are crossing into Mozambique at Forbes border post. Forbes border post is basically uncrossable at the present moment because of these humongous volumes of trucks that are carrying our lithium. And one average 30-ton truck is carrying lithium equivalent to about 3.2 million US dollars of lithium. Gold, we are exporting illicitly through illicit financial flows of gold alone, US $1 billion that is being lost in the country. Diamonds, we had diamond reserves in Manicaland that were supposed to last us for 25 years. They literally lasted us for 5 years, during which period we lost about $15 billion, a fact that was admitted by the then head of state, RGM Mugabe. So our commodities, our minerals have become a major source of arbitrage. This involves the raw extraction. This involves the illicit allocation of special grants and mining grants. This involves the physical displacement of miners and serious abuse of mining communities. You see villagers being evicted. You see even graveyards being assaulted by foreign interests in our mining interests. And if you look at our mining sector right now, I always say that if you were to work Cecil John roads now, you won't get lost because the levels of extraction that came with the pioneer column are being reproduced today. The characters and the koala may have changed, but the model remains the same. Then, of course, you've got procurement, particularly procurement around road contracts, around agricultural inputs, around healthcare supplies, around mining equipment. It has become a huge focus of corruption. Then you have got various forms of subsidies that are given in the economy, which constitutes a serious and massive levels of corruption, including command agriculture. Then you've got the Reserve Bank and its quasi-fiscal activities. For a long time, the Reserve Bank and its quasi-fiscal activities have been at the center of massive looting in Zimbabwe. At one stage, the Reserve Bank quasi-fiscal activities were 35% of gross domestic product. So these are huge numbers. So the things that are making people angry, for instance, the goat scheme, where literally some lumpen elements connected to the ruling party, we've been photographed with the president, allocated $87 billion to acquire goats. It's just a crude expression of the looting that is happening. But there's bigger expression. I don't know if one would speak about the recent case where $1.6 billion was paid to the shareholders of Kuvimba to pay for the purchase of mines, which were originally Zimbabwean mines. What happened was that a company called Sotic acquired the Zimbabwean mines owned by ZMDC, and we then paid $1.6 billion for those assets that belong to Zimbabwe. So it's crass, it's crude, and it's unmitigated. But all of us know that this is the long trend of how this government has been. I remember very young at the University of Zimbabwe demonstrating against things like the Willowgate scandal the Willowgate motor scandal in 1988. Some of you remember in 1987, this was still blast furnace scandal. Some of you remember in 1987, the plane scandal involving around $1 million. In 1989, some of you remember the ZRP Santana scandal. 1994, the War Victims Compensation Fund scandal, where people were claiming disability for 100%, including a vice president. Some of you remember 1995, the GMB grain scandal. Some of you remember 1996, the VIP housing scandal. Some of you remember 1998, the poker banking scandal. Some of you remember 1998, the ZYT Elsotran scandal. Some of you remember 1998, the Teletel scandal. Some of you will remember 1999, the Harare City Council refugee tender scandal. Now we are in 2024. It's scandal after scandal, scandal after scandal. I want to quantify, I want to try and quantify some of these things. But before I do that, I want to underline the fact that if you look at these scandals that I've been mentioning, the Willow motor scandal, the war victims, they've been occurring outside the Ministry of Finance, outside Treasury. The recent, the defining characteristic of present-day looting is that it is taking place within government directly. It is taking place with the Ministry of Finance, with the Treasury being at the center of this corruption. It is Treasury that allocated and gave $89 million to Delish Nguaya and others during the COVID. Remember the COVID scandal. This GOATS scandal you are talking about, money came from Treasury. The $1.6 billion that was given to Kuvimba shareholders came from a Treasury. So what you now see now is that Treasury, which in terms of the Public Finance Management Act, plays a regulatory authority, plays a regulatory function over line ministries and parastatals. It is a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper itself has become the gate crusher, and allocations are being made directly from Treasury itself. In other words, the center of corruption right now in Zimbabwe is the Ministry of Finance. It is the Treasury, and those that who sign that money, the Paymaster General in the form of the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance. So what is now happening is that, in terms of the law, allocations from the Treasury must go to line ministries. Then line ministries must then make payments and disbursements consistent with the appropriation account, consistent with the blue book. Now, what is happening in present-day Zimbabwe is that all payments have now been centralized to the Ministry of Finance, except, of course, wages and salaries, which are still being transmitted. So the Treasury has become the center of the corruption. So if you look at now what is happening is that you now have huge amounts that are being disbursed from Treasury, with the Treasury being at the center. I was reading the 2022 audit report, which makes a frightening reading, and it underscores how Zimbabwe is being looted. In one of those things, just to illustrate my point, the Auditor General issues a qualified opinion for the Ministry of Agriculture. The Ministry of Agriculture can't explain a payment of around $300 million in foreign currency that was made directly by the Ministry of Finance for and on their behalf. So the comments now are saying the Ministry of Agriculture must approach Treasury to ask for Treasury to explain what they paid for on their behalf. And speaking of that audit report, 60% of the government accounts are qualified. 6% of the government accounts, including that of the Ministry of Finance, has an adverse report. 4% has a disclaimer. The Auditor General can't explain. But the most frustrating thing about this audit report is that, as all of you know, the Auditor General audits the appropriation account. The appropriation account reflects the receipts and accruals into a government account and the expenditure in the accrual account. So for all the votes, there are about 77 votes in that audit statement, including that of the Office of the President and Cabinet. There is an appropriation account. But for the Ministry of Finance, there's no appropriation account. So no one can tell how much money went in and how much money got out. So in other words, the Ministry of Finance, which has become the center of looting in Zimbabwe, is now hiding its books from the people of Zimbabwe. And regrettably, the Auditor General is complicit in this by hiding the actual figures of the appropriation account of the Ministry of Finance. And without figures of the Ministry of Finance, the audit becomes a waste of time, the audit becomes useless, and I hope the Public Accounts Committee will pick this up. And I also hope that people like Janet, who is here, can consider legal action to compel the Auditor General to disclose fully what should be contained in Vote 5, the Ministry of Finance vote. But I want to go to the figures. You'll get a glimpse of the figures from what I'm about to tell you now. You will recall that in 2017, the Auditor General picked up that there was 3.2 billion US dollars that had not been accounted for. That was beyond the budget deficit that had been, accounted for. The Auditor General's report called this an unallocated reserve, but this was in fact a euphemism for money that had actually been stolen, money that was could actually not been accounted for. And of that 3.2 billion US dollars, $1.5 billion was actually disbursed on 27 December 2017. Come on, who steals on Christmas Day? But we know what was happening. I'm sure handouts were being paid and payments made for some people's role connected with the coup of 2017. So that's 2017. 2018, the Auditor General picked up 6.5 billion US dollars. 6.5 billion US dollars was picked up as money that had been stolen, money that could not be accounted for. 2019, we had a problem because this was the first year that the Auditor General then stopped publishing the appropriation accounts of the Ministry of Finance. But we know how much they stole, because in that year, they then published a financial adjustment bill in respect of which they sought condonation from Parliament of spending 10.6 billion US dollars beyond Parliament, beyond the budget, beyond the appropriation account, beyond the Blue Book. So we can roughly say that the figures that are being stolen directly from the state we have over around $10 billion. That's 2019. 2022 and 2021, you remember that there was now a consolidated financial adjustment bill that was introduced, which kind of clouded the matter because it was expressed in Zim dollars. So the first indulgence for 2021 was for 100 billion Zimbabwean dollars, which if you use the parallel market rate is nothing, but if you use the official exchange rate, it will still get you to around 10 billion, it will still get you around 10 billion US dollars. After that, we haven't had figures, but we know what they've done, and I'll give you 2 examples. So, so in 2022, the government adopts and assumes the debt of the RBZ of 3.8 billion US dollars. And also the government using statutory instrument 33 of 2019 devalues treasury bills that were now around 18 billion US dollars. By the stroke of a pen, a statutory instrument, they devalued them to meaningless amounts, because remember, they were in US dollars, they were then converted to Zimbabwean dollars at the rate of 1:1. So if you measure and if you add the amount of money that was devalued and lost as a result of treasury bills which were decapitated by SI 33 of 2019, and if you add the RBZ debt assumption of 3.8, you will still get to a figure of around US $10 billion per annum. So my submission is that through treasury alone, this government is costing the taxpayer, the citizen, around US $10 billion annually, not accounted for, not visible, and that is why the books of the Ministry of Finance can't be audited. There's no appropriation account, and that is why the Public Finance Management Act is being flouted left, right, and center. The Public Finance Management Act says that every month ministries must actually publish figures and statements of how much they are spending and how much they've received. They've not been doing that. The last time they did that was the 2013-2014. So in short, and to conclude, this has basically become a kakistocracy. This has basically become a kleptomaniac state that is cannibalizing and is extractive in its most extreme levels. You see the visible elements of this corruption through the obscene, conspicuous consumption that we see in the streets of Harare every day in the form of Lamborghini vehicles, Ferraris, the kind of vehicles that should not be driven in a pothole-ridden country, like this. We see this in the form of these extractive contracts, and roads represent some of the extractive contracts. It costs around $1 million to build a road, 1 kilometer road. In Zimbabwe, it is costing around $3.5 million to make a road. So some of you are wondering, do these people suddenly love us that they want to rehabilitate our roads? No, the answer lies in extraction. The answer lies in the rent that they are extracting from these roads. Finally, is the Mutapa Fund. The Mutapa Fund is a model that has been copied from Russia. When Russia privatized after 1989, a central fund was created with all these assets that allowed Putin and the cabals there to actually basically sell them without public scrutiny. So what has happened with the Mutapa Fund is that over 30 state-owned enterprises, including some of our blue chip national assets like ZESA, like the National Railways of Zimbabwe, Net1, they've all been lumped into this vehicle called the Mutapa Fund. This fund is so fungible. The shares, the remittances, they don't need exchange control approval. So the ultimate looting of Zimbabwe will ultimately be carried out through the fraud that is called the Mutapa Fund. I've called these people the archbishops of corruption. They are beyond the archbishops. I think Dana Papa corruption. So it's a very sad indictment. And my only regret is that I don't think that as citizens, we are doing sufficient to confront this existential threat that is facing us. And by the way, there's a connection between democracy and the rule of law and corruption. It will be very difficult for democracy to thrive when people are making millions in illicit mining, illicit cigarettes, illicit extraction, farms, land companies. They can't give up. So we have a problem. We are not confronting corruption. So I'll stop here for now, Chairman Ibo Mandas.
Thanks, thanks, Nelai. As usual, very thorough, well, all-embracing. I just before I move to the next to Nick, I just want to ask a few questions. Tendai, we have had discussion before over lunch. Where does the money go to? 10 billion per annum.
Yes, that's a very important question. That's a very important question. Yes. I would like to submit that a lot of our money is found in Mauritius. I would like to submit that if Mauritius were to close its offshore facilities, that economy would suffer, and 60% to 80% of the money located in Mauritius offshore facility is actually coming from Zimbabwe. It's actually coming from Zimbabwe. The second venue of where our money is going is South Africa. So banks such as the FNB in particular have become major recipients of illicit Zimbabwean money. Not only their bank accounts, a lot of these looters are acquiring massive real estate in South Africa, in Cape Town, in Bryanston, Joburg, in Sandton, Joburg. They're acquiring luxury apartments at places such as Michelangelo, Leonardo's in Sandton, where they take their paramours and so forth. So South Africa is a major venue of extraction of Zimbabwean wealth. Third is Dubai. Dubai has become a major center of extraction, as we saw in the 4-part documentary of the gold mafia. Dubai has become such an intrinsic infrastructure of housing illicit financial flows from Zimbabwe. Then, of course, you've got traditional centers, Hong Kong, Singapore, to some extent, some Middle Eastern, countries, the Emirates, and so forth. So the bulk of the money is going east. The bulk of the money is actually in Mauritius.
Yeah, so I'll come back to you on this, but I wanted to raise the question, if also to go beyond the moral issues related to corruption, to see how one day, in the not too distant future, Zimbabwe can recover all these monies, as happened in Nigeria after Abacha. So I think it's something to be kept in mind as the discussion progresses. So let me move now to Nick. Nick?
Thanks, Ibo. So as requested, I'll talk about ZEC and then about Mutapa. ZEC, I think, isn't sort of macroeconomically important, but it gets to the heart of Zimbabwe's politics. And I think the Mutapa issue could be of grave macroeconomic importance for Zimbabwe. So just to recap on ZEC, the investigation was broken by the news hawks and followed up by many different great Zimbabwean journalists. And the gist of the story is that Renform, a South African printing firm, had as its agent Wicknell Chivayo, that Wicknell fell out with his two business partners and they accuse him and Renform of overinflating all of their goods that they were supplying to the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, and that they alleged that Wicknell was using the surplus to make payments to Zimbabwean officials. And those aren't named, but they have initials in the leaked WhatsApp chats like GG, DG, and MOMS, MI. And as a way of following this up, I took some of the information and phoned Renform and phoned ZEC to see what they said. And we've seen some denials and some non-denial denials from some of the players. So ZEC have said they have nothing to do and have no direct business relationship with the two businessmen, Mike Chimombe and Moses Mpufu, who are now arrested for the goats. And the Renform have denied any wrongdoing, but they admitted to me that Wicknell Chivayo was their agent. I asked them, did you pay Wicknell? And he said, yeah, of course, we paid him. He was one of our agents in the country, meaning Zimbabwe, and there was nothing wrong with that. So when, and they also confirmed that they had a contract with ZEC. So we have certain bits of the story which are becoming firmer, that Renform were delivering ballot papers, biometric voter kits, biometric voter registration kits, toilets, light boxes to ZEC, and ZEC in the form of the Treasury and invoices going to the Office of President and Cabinet also were paying those during 2023 and early 2024. And the bits that are still to be investigated, and I hope will be investigated by the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, are the allegations that payments were made from Wicknell Chivayo to these officials, GG, DG, MOMS, and there are also payments, proof of payments from Wicknell Chivayo to the two businessmen in their South African companies in the form of SWIFT proof of payment documents that are floating around online as well. So it looks like Mutapa was paying those two, and it's still to be proven that he was paying the officials. And then straight after, the government paid Renform in South Africa in around April 2023. One of the payments happened then. Then Intratrek, which is Mutapa's company, started to import certain vehicles into Zimbabwe, and this is one of the questions about where does the money end up. If it is true that these payments are connected, then Wicknall's companies, IMC Plant Hire and Intratrek, imported a 2023 Mercedes-Benz GLS 600, a 2020 Rolls-Royce Phantom, and a 2022 Rolls-Royce Cullinan, and actually had them flown into Harare from London. So some of the money that Wicknall was earning actually ends up in the city in which I live. The total amount from the proof of payment documents that we're able to see was about 30 million. And there are instructions from the Treasury to the Reserve Bank and from the Treasury to CBZ to pay Renform for a few other tens of million. But I don't know if those were paid. They may well be, maybe just the documents are missing, or they may not have been paid. It's not clear yet. And obviously there are rumours going around that the total may have reached around 100 million. Now, Mutapa didn't respond to my calls, but he's denied everything online, said it's all fake media, and he said that the audio of him saying that the president calls him my son, that's all faked and is a product of artificial intelligence. And Renform deny paying any bribes and also deny inflation. But when I asked them about specific prices that were inflated, for example, there was a computer server that they appeared to invoice for 1.25 million, and ZimLive found that you can buy that exact same model for $5,000 on Amazon or online. They declined to specify why the prices were so high, other than to say that in contracts everything changes. So I think there's a lot for ZAC to investigate. I hope they eventually do, and I also will be following up in South Africa to make sure that this information gets in front of the South African authorities, because it should be investigated on both sides of the border. But the most important bit, I think, isn't perhaps the money, but it's a bit an allegation in the news hawks last week from a great journalist who covered this, who wrote some more about how the plans to obtain the contract took place. And there was one specific bit, which is there was a relationship between Scott Sakapwanya's firm, Better Brand Security, and Renform, and there's a leaked contract proving that. And the allegation in news hawks is that Sakapwanya paid or provided 200,000 to fund the project to obtain the relationship with Renform. Of this money, they write 30,000 was used for flights to meet Renform in South Africa in February 2023, 80,000 for other costs and expenses, and US 90,000 to pay the chair of ZEC overseas tuition fees and upkeep bills for her children. And I'd just like to say that's an extraordinary allegation. And if true, what it means is that one of Sakapwanya's firms, Sakapwanya, remember at this point, was chair of or a member of ZANU-PF's fundraising committee and a ZANU-PF candidate, was making a payment to the impartial chair of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. And I think that gets to the heart of the elections and the trouble that Zimbabwe has having free and fair elections, and the role that corruption, if this allegation is in any way true, could have in corrupting the role that impartial institutions, which are meant to oversee free and fair elections. It's an incredibly serious allegation and deserves to be investigated in full. So I'll pause there on ZEC and then move on to Mutapa. So we published something yesterday about a specific payment, which again was broken.
Sorry, Nick. Before you move to Mutapa, just you have been very careful and if not also very modest in your statements, what prima facie would be your conclusion as to whether the ZEC is the center of this corruption involving Chivayo and Sakupanya? And to what extent can we get confirmation about the role of Renform itself from the South African authorities, if we haven't got the information yet? Because I'm told that they were supposed to have had the authority or the blessing of South Africa to get involved in such a task as printing ballots. What more can you tell us about that before you move to Mutapa Fund?
So I think the questions that ZEC need to answer are, if they see a particular item that costs 1.25 million on the invoice, why on earth would they pay that when they can do a check and find it online for $5,000? And if they don't have an adequate answer to that question, which should be posed by the Public Accounts Committee, by the Auditor General, and by the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission and the police, then they've got a serious investigation should ensue into who authorized those payments. And then it's a matter of collaborating with the South African authorities over the payments, because from the leaked information, it appears that there are payments going from Zimbabwe to Renform, and then what the South African authorities need to do is look at the payments from Renform to their agent in South Africa, and the payments from the Wicknell Chivayo's South African bank account, and where did they go? And Zimbabwe needs to match that with looking at Intratrek, IMC, and Wicknell Chivayo's accounts in Zimbabwe to see where the outgoing payments went, or if large US dollar sums were withdrawn around this period. I think that's as sort of close as I can take it, because to be honest, it's not my investigation, and I just followed up a bit by calling up Renform and phoning up ZEC to see what they had to say.
Okay, carry on then, Nick.
Okay, so on Mutapa, let's go back in time to one of the companies and individuals that Honourable BT mentioned. So Tagore and a Mauritius company called Sotic. So Tagore, as everybody knows, made their money. He made his money in the fuel business with Trafigura and was paid offshore in a Swiss bank account, a Pictet bank account. Took a lot of his payments there. He also made money in Command Agriculture, and as Honourable BT investigated when he was at the Public Accounts Committee, some of his wealth was received in the form of a treasury bill, and he was protected from the currency reform of Statutory Instrument 33, 2019, and that protection saved him tens of millions of dollars. And he also made some money from the DEMA procurement of a diesel energy generation plant, where the fingers on the scales were tipped in his favor by the Office of the President and Cabinet in 2016 during President Mugabe's time. Then he he did move away from the fuel business and set up Sotic and companies called Landella in Zimbabwe. And the purpose of Sotic was to trade commodities and to own mines and sell the minerals outside of Zimbabwe and keep the profits offshore, and then do commodity trading offshore based in Mauritius. And it wasn't a normal company. So they would meet regularly with His Excellency. I was told by someone who knew about this directly. And that we saw sometimes that there was involvement of senior politicians in Sotic's affairs. So I think the preeminent example was Sotic made a proposal, a 1.2 billion proposal, to prepay Noik, the pipeline company, and get a discount on the import of fuel into Zimbabwe on the Beira pipeline. And this proposal contained a term sheet, a contract that had already been signed by John Manguja, at the time the Reserve Bank governor. And the proposal was actually sent by SB Moyo to NOIC. And the NOIC board, when they looked at this proposal, said, look, the government's clearly already decided, it's a done deal, we're going to have to just go along with it. And it's quite extraordinary, really, that you would have a foreign minister of a country sending a proposal into the state-owned oil pipeline company on behalf of a Mauritius company. It's like a very unusual thing to happen. And then when one of the proxy directors who was working for Tagore and Sotic fell out with all of his colleagues at Sotic and fell out with Tagore himself and was asking for more money and a payoff, he went to Tagore and tried to get money, and Tagore was ill at the time from COVID, and he was told to go and see GG and SB Moyo and George Guvmatanga, and eventually did go and see George Guvmatanga to try and sort it out. And so again, you have senior politicians and officials being involved in the dealings of Sotic. And at one point, Tagore is, in these sort of leaked documents that we read, he's resisting requests for more money from this disgruntled employee and says, look, I'm just the 35% shareholder of Sotic, government 65%, they're the other shareholders, you need to go and talk to them, go and talk to SB, go and talk to GG, and if they can't sort it out, then we'll go higher. So you have these initials at GG and SB popping up. And then all of the mines that Sotic and Lendella had bought, so Great Dyke Investments, a platinum mine, Bandura Nickel, Frida Rebecca Gold Mine, after Tagore gets sanctioned in 2020, they all get transferred over to Covimba. And Covimba, the government says, is 35% owned by private investors, management, including the managers of Covimba, and 65% owned by various government entities like the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and some money is allocated towards the former farmers, who there's a deal to compensate them eventually, and there's also a proposal to use some of the money to compensate pensioners who lost out in the currency reforms. And so this 65-35% split between government 65% and mystery private investors 35%, that is important to remember. And there's a complete denial from the finance minister, Ntuli Nube, and Covimba that Tagore is involved. But they say that a company called Ziwa is involved, and it turns out when we receive Ziwa corporate records, that the owner of Ziwa is a company called Thimby Resources, and the owners of that company are two trusts. One is called the Kuda Kwashere Tagore Trust. So in 2021, when we did this investigation, Tagore was definitely involved in Covimba on the 35% side of the ownership. Now, move forward to late 2023 and early 2024, and Covimba has moved into Mutapa alongside all of the other state-owned enterprises, or many of them, including NOIC, the pipeline company, and ZESA, the Zimbabwe electricity company. And the private investors, managers, still own 35% of Covimba. So Mutapa's set up. Mutapa's still being formed. It still doesn't have a website. It's still appointing senior staff. And Mutapa makes a decision to buy out the 35% owned by private investors, so-called managers, and everyone's refusing to say who owns the 35%. They won't name the individual person or the legal entity who currently or until recently owned the 35%. So what we knew in 2021, there was a company called Ziwa and a company called Thimby Resources and a trust, two trusts. One of them was called Kuda Kwashere Tagore Trust. We don't know, and we're not entirely sure, whether Kuda Kwashere Tagore was involved at the moment that Mutapa bought the shares. He denies it, Covimba denies it, and Mutapa denies it. However, we, the Century, spoke to senior business people who were dealing with Covimba right up until September 2023 and said that for some of the big decisions, they needed to be made by Tagore at that time. So from them, it's saying maybe he wasn't an owner, but he was certainly involved in running Covimba or aspects of it in September 2023, very recently, just before the share purchase by Mutapa. And then, so we know that Mutapa bought out the 35%. The Newshawks broke the story in April that the price tag was 1.6 billion US dollars, and that it had been funded by a treasury bill. We followed this up. We asked around. Our sources say that in the recent months that 3 billion in treasury bills have been issued in just the last months, taking the amount of debt that Zimbabwe owes to external and domestic creditors up from 17.69 billion up to 21 billion. So about 3 billion jump. And what sources are saying is that 900 million of those treasury bills were allocated to recapitalizing the Reserve Bank, and 1.9 billion had been allocated to recapitalizing Mutapa. And then if the Newshawk story is correct, and the price tag of 1.6 billion is correct, and it means that the majority of that money that was meant to recapitalize Mutapa and be used for all of the different state-owned enterprises under the Mutapa umbrella, that the bulk of it, perhaps 4/5, if it's accurate, was used to pay out the private investors in Kavimba. Now, 1.6 billion is a lot of money in Zimbabwe. It's 5% of Zimbabwean GDP. As a guide, in 2022, the combined health and education budgets were 1.2 billion for primary and secondary education and the health budget. So it's more than the health and education budgets together. And so it's a lot of money, and it's almost the first decision of Mutapa. And because Mutapa is a sovereign wealth fund and is a public entity, Zimbabwean citizens really should know how their money is being spent. And in particular, they should know who got paid. So we think that the questions that the Public Accounts Committee and the Auditor General should be asking are, who were the recipients of this 1.6 billion, if that's the right amount? And how was the valuation of Kavimba done? And the reason that they should ask about the valuation is that until 18 months ago, the government seemed to value Kavimba at 1.5 billion, the whole of Kavimba. And then previously, the previous year, it valued Kavimba at 2 billion. And the 1.6 billion for 35% of Kavimba, if you sort of triple it, you get to 4.6 billion for the 100%. So 35%, 1.6, 100%, 4.6 billion. So it looks like the previous valuation 18 months ago in 2022 tripled to 4.6 billion, if that 1.6 billion price tag is correct. So we see this apparent jump in the valuation. And because this is all happening behind closed doors, this gets to what could be one of the major costs and macroeconomic costs of corruption, if this is indeed corruption. Because what's happening is behind closed doors, people are making valuations of publicly owned entities and private entities, and the payments are going to private entities all behind closed doors, and there's no way of seeing whether the valuations are accurate. And Kavimba could have become more valuable because the gold price has gone up, but on the other hand, it's also got platinum and lithium assets, and platinum and lithium has gone down. Bindura Nickel has issued profit warnings and has suspended production. Frida Rebecca is doing well. Great Dyke Investments, the Russians pulled out. It's just a big hole in the ground at the moment. So it might be worth a lot, but it might be worth almost nothing at the moment. It's really difficult to tell. So it's really difficult to value these companies. And the government itself had a very different valuation of only 1.5 billion in 2022. And now it seems to be valuing it at 4.6 billion. So it looks, there's a case for investigation by the Auditor General, by the Public Accounts Committee, into how that valuation was done and whether it's the right valuation to see whether Zimbabwean citizens got value for money. And so going back in time to when Tagore's firms bought all of those mines, the most that he paid is in the low hundreds of millions. In our report, we've got some details of how we came to that, but we were using his own leaked documents to look at what was paid here and there. So, for example, for Bandira and Nickel and Frida Rebecca put together, he paid 23 million sterling, so about 29 million US dollars at the time to both companies. So not super amounts. And then it looks like we've leapt from 2019, low hundreds of millions, 2021, a 2 billion valuation, 2022, a 1.5 billion valuation, and now 2024, a 4.6 valuation, a big jump. Is that justified? That's the question to answer. And then I'll just finish on this bit about the other possible macroeconomic cost of corruption. So corruption, obviously, it kind of can misallocate resources, it can deter certain investors, it really can corrode the rule of law if the corruption starts to infect the judiciary, and it can infect the politics, as we saw potentially with ZEC. And then there's this particular thing, because Zimbabwe has had this long legacy of toxic and really unpayable debt. A lot of it should be wiped out in a debt restructuring exercise so that Zimbabwe can get access to cheap loans again. So at the moment, it's, for example, reliant on loans from Afreximbank, which are in double figures, so 10%, 9% loans, and money from China is dried up, and Zimbabwe can't access the international markets. It just cannot get cheap loans, which is what it needs to invest in public services, in electrifying the country, in dams, for example. So it really needs these cheap loans, and it really concerns creditors when they don't know how much Zimbabwe owes, because that means that existing creditors who are being asked to agree not to pay back all of the money or some of the money that they were lent out, that they've got to suddenly take more of a hit. And that really complicates the debt restructuring exercise that the African Development Bank is using at the moment. And the last point I'll make, and I'll stop, is that there are probably better ways of spending this money. So 1.6 billion is a lot of money, it's 5% of GDP. The cost of electrifying and expanding the grid by 2030, the electricity grid in Zimbabwe is estimated to be 4.4 billion by 2030. That 1.6 billion could have gone a long way to doing that, and electricity is one of the core parts of the solution to Zimbabwe's economic crisis. And it's no accident, I think, that ZESA is part of Mutapa, and instead of paying money towards a productive outcome, it instead spent money compensating private investors, who may include Tagore, who's a presidential advisor and a donor to ZANU-PF. So there's some real questions for the Auditor General and Public Accounts Committee to look into about whether this is a good use of funds, or alternatively, it could be the biggest scandal in Zimbabwean history.
Thanks, Nick. On that note, we'll come back to you. Let's move on to Chennai, we have to go and vote just now. Chennai?
Hi, Ibo, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you clearly. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. So I have to take a moment to get a bit of water then. Those are huge sums that Nick was highlighting. And of course, Honorable Biti before that, in terms of the cost of corruption in Zimbabwe, it's quite astounding. So what I wanted to do, Ibo, today was just to share with the audience what has happened to our line of defense. You know, because Zimbabwe is a sovereign state, we do have a line of defense. We have institutions that are designed to initially avoid us getting into these situations. And when we are in these situations, making sure that, you know, that cases are taken up into court, that there is some kind of, you know, repatriation of funds where, you know, where cases have been taken to court, etc. So what actually is happening with our line of defense? what is happening with the institutions that should be protecting the public purse and are failing to do so. And I just want to spotlight the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, the Procurement Regulatory Authority, the Ministry of Finance, and of course the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, because to me this kind of is your line from line 1 to 4 in terms of line of defense against corruption. So we start off with ZAC. So ZAC has been designed purely for arresting and for ensuring that the country is safeguarded against corruption. But if we look at the 2022 Audit General Report, you will find that ZAC in itself fails the probity test in terms of how well it looks after its own house. So, you know, the 2022 Audit General Report was reporting that ZAC has received donations from RBZ. So some of these situations that investigative journalists such as the Sentry and Nick has been presenting, that they've discovered around what the RBZ has been up to with the treasury bills, with the command agriculture loans, how then can ZAC actually act in a way that is appropriate in terms of test the corruption test on RBZ when they themselves have been receiving donations, house donations from ZAC. And what the Audit General report actually highlighted were that these houses were never actually fully accounted, so they were not recorded on ZAC's balance sheet. So again, we see ZAC in the Audit General report getting 10 vehicles, which they only accounted for 5. Which I think this was issued through the public budget to the tune of 350,000. So even the way that they procure and tender their own expenses, you know, is not correct, is not in line with acceptable standards in terms of transparency, in terms of accountability. There's no audit trail on the way that they account for their expenses. And I think the report also highlighted a lot of accounting discrepancies, particularly around how they account for exchange rate differences. So that kind of almost, it rules out ZAC. In terms of ZAC as well, you know, we've talked about here, and I think Nick was also highlighting the role of the Audit General's office, the role of even media in highlighting these areas of discrepancy. And yet what we are finding is that I think in 2022, the legal manager at ZAC highlighted that they discovered 681 cases of corruption. And of those, only 23 were convicted. And this is an institution that is being given nearly 10% of our annual budget is going to ZAC. And this is the conviction rate. You know, what's the percentage? 681 cases versus 23 convictions. We know where they talk about all the seizures of property that happened in 2022. There was a report that was highlighting something like 63 trucks, 28 trailers, $29 million. But we come back to the point that Honorable Biti was highlighting when he was looking at public accounts, that is not indicated anywhere. You can't find, okay, so if you recovered $29 million US, where is this now? Does that mean it makes its way back into the public purse? What has happened to the trucks? We are then seeing 2 years in 2024, 22 of those 63 trucks have been judged through the High Court that they should be given back actually to the owner. This is the Wadika case. So we are seeing a case, a very high profile public case. Trucks were seized. There was a court order. It goes to the High Court, give him back his trucks, give him back his cars, give him back whatever you'd taken from him. And even then ZAC is going, I think they've tried to then go into the Supreme Court on this particular case. And this has taken more than 2 years to recover. So you see, we get this situation where organizations like the Sentry, you know, they're doing, we had a report, was it in 2014, on the Marange, the diamond, and issues around, you know, misappropriation of royalties, etc. And to date, we don't know what has happened. These cases, they are highlighted, they are high profile. ZAC claims to be all over it, and then it disappears through some kind of a gray hole where we don't know what happens next, and these monies are never recovered from what we can find, at least in the public domain. So this discrepancy around enforceability, around probity of ZAC itself, mean that we don't actually have, I think we fail the test of having that line of defense in terms of an anti-corruption commission. Then we look at PRAS, the Procurement Regulatory Authority. I think they were given an over $2 million grant by the World Bank to improve the way our transparency in terms of public procurement, to improve, in terms of using more digital capabilities in terms of public procurement tenders. And yet we are seeing still a lot of scandals that are coming through. The goat scandal, any scandal has gone through public procurement, and yet they've not been able to there's no transparency. We still don't have open contracting in terms of, if you and I could go on to the PRAS database and search for tenders and search who was awarded and what was given to them, then we would be part of that accountability. That would be part of that transparency check. We would not be waiting for the mafia fights to break out on WhatsApp and the WhatsApp admin releasing an audio for that to become the trigger. So PRAS, to me, fails the litmus test in terms of being able to really have a way of protecting public funds in the way that we tender, in the way that we are transparent, and even in terms of the competitive process, I think it's been mentioned already, things like the drug scandal that involved ministries and ministers. And, even Goamatanga's office is named in that, in terms of deciding who gets allocated contracts. And they should not be getting involved at that level. We saw another, in terms of the quality of contracting, I want to just highlight quickly the Wicknell ZESA, the solar energy contract, where that was not delivered. I think Parliament, the legislators got involved. A case was opened up against the vendor, who was whatever Wicknell's outfit was at the time. And, it was deemed that the contract wasn't. But instead, what he's then been able to do, and this is where it's just beyond a joke, he's then been able to counter-sue ZESA. And he's been awarded $22 million worth of damages by the courts. So what really we should then go back to is look at the contract that was issued to him. Why have we issued a contract that can be so easily ignored, and then the state is sued because when the contract wasn't delivered? So what is in our contract documents, and why are they allowing these things to happen, and for Zimbabweans to lose out so much in terms of the way we do our contracting? And then moving on to the Ministry of Finance, I think Honorable Biti already mentioned, in terms of the Ministry of Finance is ultimately responsible. The buck stops with the Ministry of Finance, right? Even in terms of the mega contracts, they literally sign them off. And we have had decades, and in the last 5 years, a lot of mega contracts that have been inflated, that have not delivered. We've got missing goats. So why do they not take their position seriously enough to be able to say, right, if I'm signing my name to this, I want to know that it's been a competitive process, that we've had best endeavors in terms of the price that has been issued out on the contract, and how are we monitoring the delivery of the contract? But we see the Ministry of Finance is really not, they are part of the mafia, if you like. There was a committee, Public Accounts Committee report that was done in 2019. And I quote from that, which said that there is an entrenchment within the Ministry of Finance of a culture of non-compliance by the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development officials, and indeed by other ministries. And the committee found that they concluded that in some instances, there was deliberate, willful breach of the law. And in other instances, there was total ignorance of the law and negligence or indifference. And this is the Ministry of Finance. This is what a report through Parliament highlighted. And I think I will also touch on briefly here the role of Parliament, the role of legislator, and even the role of Audit General, which really pales to very little when their discoveries, the things that they talk about, they highlight, nothing is done about it. There's no will, there's no political will to do the right thing. Rather, we are seeing a protection of this kind of mafia culture. And perhaps it comes back to what Honorable Biti was saying in terms of, democracy. Are they trying to stop us from achieving democracy by promoting a culture of corruption, a culture where, we're losing, there's so much leakage in the economy through these bad contracts. When then we get to the RBZ and the financial crime unit, whom again I hold the same, I think together with the Ministry of Finance, they really are our first line of defense in terms of how well the country deals with corruption. And yet we find the RBZ themselves at the center of a lot of these scandals. We all know the gold mafia scandal. We know the involvement of the RBZ in that. We know that following the gold mafia scandal and what was highlighted through the Al Jazeera documentary, that the financial crime unit wrote 2 letters. That's all we know that they did about it. The first to say they're looking into it, and the second to say everything's fine. We can't find anything. There were no changes. Nothing was done to protect the public purse from further corruption, from further, stealing, as we are seeing through the gold smuggling scandal. They've been again associated with forex allocation corruption, in terms of the way that foreign currency, there was a report that was done in terms of treasury bills that were done to Secunda. This was again another Century report that highlighted the different rates that were given to Secunda by the RBZ, in issuance of the treasury bills, and the profits that they made over and above what everybody else could have had. So they were given a different preferential rate of exchange when I think it was in 2016. So again, so if they cannot undertake to make sure that they themselves pass the litmus test of corruption and accountability, how are they going to be able, can we trust such an institution to then do something about protecting treasury and protecting the public purse? The RBZ were also part of the Command Agriculture scandal, which I think has been highlighted already. So, we do not have, in fact, what I would say is that because we're actually paying for the existence of these institutions, that is our first loss as a country. Our second loss becomes that these institutions are part of the corruption scandals. So do we actually need them? Should we be continuing as we are without any form of line of defense in terms of corruption? Because this is where us as a people, as a citizenry, we need to be able to say that no, we don't want ZAC anymore. Forget it, because if we are paying them $1 billion a year, and still we lose so much more. I mean, these figures that Nick was sharing, we could run Lesotho for 2 years, without even specifically looking at the needs of Zimbabwe. It's quite astonishing how much money we lose. At the same time, how much money we are paying out to institutions that are failing to protect the public purse. I think I'll stop there for now.
Thanks, Janai. Thanks very much. It'd be good to put some of those notes on paper and send them to us. I think they're very pertinent observations about the porous nature or weakness of our institutions. In the end, wonder, do we have any institutions left? It's just incredible. We don't have a parliament now. We have a farcical situation in terms of the separation of powers, if there ever was such a dispensation in Zimbabwe. Let me move quickly. You probably thank you for being with us. I know you're leaving just now to vote. Vote wisely, as they say, Janai.
I will.
Okay, bye-bye. We'll talk tomorrow. Okay. Janet, are you ready?
Yes, Doc, thank you very much. So I guess my fellow panelists have done most in terms of explaining the state of corruption and how it has spread its tentacles all across sectors, disparaging institutions, and also the extent in terms of the numbers and the figures from Honorable BT, my friend Nick, and Chennai as well. And I like the financialization and putting the figures as to how much we are losing through corruption. But probably from where I'm sitting, it is to think through this in terms of people's livelihoods and what the cost of corruption is to an ordinary citizen or an ordinary Zimbabwean who is not employed or is underemployed, to an ordinary Zimbabwean who expects to receive healthcare, to receive quality education, to have basic needs and rights that are in the Constitution being fulfilled, just such as food, water, housing, and health and education, as we have said. And 2013 to now, we're still struggling in terms of making the progressive steps towards the realization of these basic social and economic rights that are enshrined in our Constitution, from the wisdom that these have to be made justiciable, and the government has, to the best of its ability, and to make sure that to the maximum they've used the available resources to ensure that these social and economic rights have been fulfilled. If we are to look back from 2013, I'm just talking at least for the lifespan of the current Constitution that we have, and we look at the various social sectors and the need, of course, based on our Constitution, but on the various as well international conventions that Zimbabwe ratified and is part of and committed to fulfill, it has failed to meet these basic. It has not only failed, but in quite instances, it has actually failed to the extent that it has made retrogressive steps in terms of the realization of these basic social and economic rights. And these retrogressive steps can be marked, we can use the landmarks, for example, of the epidemics that we have failed to contain and have lost lives. We can talk about the lives we have lost on the death traps we call our rods in Zimbabwe. We can talk about how many girls and boys have had to drop out of school, COVID-19, and how we struggled to offer social safety nets that are adequate, that could even ensure that workers that were impacted, even in the informal, to create jobs, and the many other things, the economy. So many retrogressive steps have actually been made, despite the resources that we have and that we have actually lost. So for me, it's to try and put that human face to all these resources and the finances and the figures that have been shared here by Honorable BT, by through the various century reports that we will not leave the retrogressive step of actually a ballooning debt stock, which we have seen, which is unexplainable. We have such debt which crowds out. We are in a period where we are saying we are trying to have dialogue for the arrears clearance and for us to be able to access concessionary loans and not the expensive loans that we have received or the resource-backed loans that we have been pursuing from the East, from such countries as China, as Belarus, as Russia, and others. So it's a big question that we're talking about, a leap from 18 billion to 21 billion and the ballooning of the domestic debt. The figures that we have had, for example, if 1.6 billion was paid to one individual in Zimbabwe, 5% of the gross domestic product paid to one individual. That is monumental corruption, where the citizens who are concerned, who are suffering in Zimbabwe, which they rightfully deserve, what it would be to break down in terms of what can $1.6 billion do in terms of provision of health sector, our education sector, access to water, addressing the climate crisis. We're talking about forms of poverty and inequality in Zimbabwe. We know that in our 2023 report, for example, by the UNICEF, over half of the children in Zimbabwe live in extreme poverty. The IMF has given us, at one point, we're talking of almost 50% of Zimbabweans living in extreme poverty. What could 1.6 billion given to one? Probably approximating financial flows through corruption, money have done in terms of transforming our economy, in terms of paying our concessionary loans and not mortgaging our resources and disparaging our communities and our environment in the way that you have seen. Just drive along Gweru Road and you pass and you are going to Rishavani. You cry when you see what kind of extractivism is happening there, and how I would say that what this has done is corruption has totally undermined the social contract that must exist between citizens and its government and the various institutions that have also been explained by Chennai. So the government is not holding its side of the social contract in terms of providing, in terms of dealing with corruption, the impunity that we have seen. We've actually seen the denying of people to have access to economic opportunities, to have access to public services. So these are the key things that we have to consider in terms of, yes, these big figures we are talking, the citizens' welfare and livelihoods and society has actually ignored and plundered upon, actually to a great democratic principles of ensuring that the government is accountable to its people and practices prudent stewardship of public funds and public resources that it receives. We know that for those that are in Zimbabwe, issues around energy poverty. If you just think of how electricity and we are experiencing because of aging infrastructure, those are just some of those examples that we have. I wanted to talk about resources that we have had that have been lost, corruption that has been nurtured, where we have seen the retrograde is part of the education sectors and of the national budget towards. We have not met this. We're still at 17%. The access to water we are talking about, the 1.5%, we are just at about 1.1. The transport and infrastructure, a lot of resource there. But if we were to do an audit in terms of the cost of the infra, the enormous needs and the rights that have to be fulfilled as a duty by the state and the government, this has not happened. Social protection, agriculture, we fall way below in most of these in terms of the benchmarks that we have, but also in terms of our constitution, and in an effective way to actually be met. So this then aggression in terms of social and economic rights, the Auditor General's report of 2021 is an example, said children were learning in beer halls, in garages, in backyards, in places like Bindura. We have a backlog, we don't have teachers, the teacher-student ratio, the tools of the trade for the teachers are not there, they have not been provided. The Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education has said we have a shortfall in terms of schools of about 2,953. And I'm just thinking of the figures that we have heard of, the various scandals that we have witnessed, that we have heard of, that we have estimated in terms of the losses that we have encountered, and how this has actually stolen from the citizens, the deserving students, and given only to a few. We have done the many things that, for example, Honorable Beat was talking about, advancing, accumulating at personal levels, plush and luxurious lifestyles at the expense of the citizens, or the masses and the average citizens and youth and children, people with disabilities, women who are struggling with the burden of unpaid care work, especially since after COVID-19, where their care burdens have actually increased because of lack of employment, because of lack of basic services like health, like education, and that unpaid care work has actually increased because of all this. And our economy has simply lost its identity from probably when we knew of it and when we got independence, and we wanted an economy that takes care of its people. We wanted a government that is active and distributes resources in an activist kind of manner in terms of identifying those areas that that do need that kind of help. And we talk of the health as an example. We have heard and seen in many reports from the ministries, from the Auditor General's reports, insufficient ambulances, skills flight, the issues around cancer machines, the maternal and infant mortality rates in Zimbabwe remaining very high. And these are really issues of concern amidst the stealing and the corruption that we have seen that has been met and massaged by the impunity that we continue to see, because we see all these and nothing then really is done, or there's no conclusion of these cases. And I'm sure Chennai has addressed that when she was talking about how institutions could play their oversight role, could play their mandates and deliver on their mandates to ensure that we have arrested corruption, prevented it, stopped it, and fight it. And we have a society that becomes egalitarian in a way than the increased inequalities that we have continued to see. So I'll just end, Doc, by saying that when we hear of these cases, the various cases that we have had, even in just the recent past, the ZEC, the GOTS, the central reports like I've referred, and the many that have been outlined by Honorable Beatty. At the center of it, there is a citizen, there is a woman, there is a youth, there is a girl, there is a child, there is a family that is actually struggling to put food on the table, to go to school, who are dying of diseases that can be easily cured if there were medicines in hospital, if there was medical personnel in the hospitals. Children, our education sector, we used to boast of our high literacy rates. But if you look now at the quality of education that the students or the kids are receiving, teachers are demotivated, they're not learning, and we are undoing all that for the next generation. And you ponder and ask yourself that the investments that we have made or actually said we want to be part of the next generation through the children in Zimbabwe that people have, what kind of a society, what kind of a future are we going to give them when we are leaving them with nothing? They will curse at us in terms of really what we are leaving the environment as, what we are leaving the economy as, what we are doing even as families. Sometimes I wonder even as well the issue of family value, the issue of family is in the constitution of Zimbabwe. But what is family when people are all over scattered and in the diaspora, we're trying to fend for those families but not staying together? So what value is that to Zimbabweans when they say at the center there is an issue of family as a value in Zimbabwe? So these are just some of those issues that I believe have been caused by corruption. Identify and link with corruption when it comes to its costs, when we unpack those figures and put the faces and the names to it. I'm sure we can put the faces, but we all know we can actually put the names to it of people that we have seen die, people that have dropped out of school, families that have been destroyed because of the current status, while at least a few are benefiting from the resources. I thank you, Doc, and I'll hand back to you.
Well, thanks, Janet. Thanks very much. That passionate presentation, which underscores the obvious relationship between corruption and the destitution of 50% of our population. The sad situation that we're in, and no doubt corruption has compounded that situation. We'd like to document this more carefully, and I don't know whether we'll have any discussion in the face of this expose. We have had amazing figures. I mean, take Tendai's outline. In the last 6 years alone, we may have lost something like $60 billion through corruption, what others call illicit financial flows. And if we add the 15 billion from the diamonds, and in the years between 2006 and 2016, we are talking easily of 80 to 100 billion, of loss to the country. And any country with that kind of money would go very far. If possibly further than our neighboring countries, who, as I've said before, are easily 30, 40 years ahead of us now. Anyway, we have a few minutes for questions, submissions, and maybe want to ask our panelists, the three will remain, Janet, Nick, and Tendai. The floor is open. Just raise your hand.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Who are you?
Oh, my name is Santos. I'm from South Africa.
Okay.
Yes. I have one question. Why they don't declare corruption a crime against humanity? I mean, from just listening to this story, I mean, this corruption is destroying a whole bunch of, people. Millions of people are suffering. This is like a crime against humanity. Why UN? They don't have like International Court of Justice just to hunt down these criminals who make their people suffer.
Thanks, Santos. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Makokoba, your hand up. Hello? Makokoba. Anyone else?
Okay, Makokoba is here.
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Great panel, great discussion, great chronicles of corruption, great analysis, great exposure of the things that have corroded and destroyed our country, our communities, our family, our future, and the future of our generations. I say kudos to the panel. You have done a very good job, Comrade BT, Sister Tendai, Sister Janet, and the host for hosting this kind of thing. But my only appeal, and I've been in many spaces where these discussions of corruption are happening. Mr. Chairman, can you call a session where we come and discuss solutions? Because if we are so good about analyzing, giving figures and everything about what happened since 1980 to now, analyzing the problem will not really give us will not save us until the time we sit down and agree to come up with solutions to say, what shall we do? The Varakash are busy mocking us out there. We have done this. So what shall you do? We want an answer to the question, what shall we do? As Zimbabweans, as smart as we are renowned to be the most educated country in Africa. But our education has become a mockery. Because they say you are educated, you do have good jobs, you speak good English, you do this. I hear articulate sisters that should be sitting in parliament, directing the affairs of the country. But they are speaking in diaspora, they can't be in their own land. Why don't we focus on strategies and solutions to say, what can we do? So, Chairman, I'm challenging you to call and host another meeting where we talk about what shall we do? What can we do? Because this analysis, it's happening concurrently on the space right now. They're analyzing another issue of corruption. It will be there tomorrow, analyzing issue of corruption. And the people are very articulate. But there is no solution. There is no one proffering solution, concrete solution, way forward. And we can analyze until the donkeys have got ears, they've got horns. It will not save us. We need solutions. Thank you.
I agree entirely. I think the panelists have taken note. We'll also have something to say at the end. Anyone else with the hand up? Or will I go back to my panelists? I think, Chennai, you're still there. You'd like to say something about the issue of reform? Before I call on Janet, and then Nick, and then Tendai last. Chennai? Chennai gone? Janet? You want to answer the last speaker? What can be done? Or rather, what is to be done?
Thank you very much. I'm sure we all know that we have to make the cost of corruption high. And I think that we have not done that. And this is because of the culture of impunity that we have seen. So we need to deal with the issue of impunity. I'm sure we are also a whole generation, and we are raising another generation that is seeing corruption work, and we have built the Mbinga culture where people get rich without really showing in terms of the work that they are putting into it. We are not rewarding work, honest work in Zimbabwe. In actual fact, we have really discouraged people from earning an honest living. So I'm just pointing to.
We should design something to ensure that those who are corrupt pay for it, pay back.
They have to pay, and there must be a high cost to be corrupt in Zimbabwe.
But what if the corruption, as appears to be the case, is made in the upper circles, echelons of political elite?
That's takes, I guess, at this point in time, taking from Chennai's submissions in terms of how.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you can hear me. Looking to the issue of
your connectivity has been very bad. You're breaking a lot. But anyway, let me go to Kaiser Mlambo. Then before I come to Nick for his last comments. Kaiser Mlambo. Kaiser.
Yeah. Thank you, sir, for this incredible meeting. But I joined late, so I was just hearing people, talking, Vanama Kokova and others. And I think before elections, you also organized another, credible meetings soon after the corruption that was shown by Al Jazeera, those documentaries. I second the sentiments of Bama Kokova that we need to do more. We need to be more practical, and I think we need to find each other as Zimbabweans to maybe form more institutions, that will help us, challenge the system, because this thing is complex. It is more than politics. It requires every Zimbabwean. So I don't know how we're going to do it, but we have to network, create platforms that will, energize us to do more, to do a lot of things, to use different tools to fight this system. I believe that there are solutions. Where there is a problem, there's always a solution. And that solution will come from Zimbabweans. Us as also Zimbabweans, we've started something lately. We did a few things in South Africa last year, trying to demonstrate, or even going to the Bridge border post. We initially started as progressive Zimbabweans. We saw some progress, but now we've revised it because we're learning. So we created something called Zim for All Foundation. So this is just one of the small organizations. We want a lot of them to, fight the system, because these guys who are doing corruptions, they will never give us our country back just like that. We have to fight, because they subtly, they subtly on this bridge of corruption. They form systems that won't make it easy for us to get this country back. So talking is cheap. So we just need to add it by something by doing practical things and coming up with different tools to fight the system. So yeah, we need a lot of civil society organizations to blossom. We need a lot of people that will spread this gospel and conscientize people and let them know what is exactly going on. And then we're coming in as Zimbabweans and fight, because we're not inventing any new will. Other communities have done it before and they've been successful. So when we follow those principles that have been used by different communities to fight, we'll be able to do something than just talking. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
And you can also visit us on youtube.com/@SAPES Trust. The support and views will help us to continue the debate. And we must keep in touch. You know where we are now. We are meeting every fortnight, doing the little that we can do to conscientize the population, to give hope to the population that power is in their hands, as you said correctly. Now I move to Nick, your last comments, and I would like you to assist us in terms of the kind of work you are doing in your organization. Not only exposing corruption, as you have done so eminently, but also what can be done to punish corruption, and more important, for the countries well, such as Zimbabwe, how we can recover and repatriate our enormous resources lying out there. Nick Donovan.
This is a really big topic that Santos and the second and third question has brought up. We normally recommend solutions such as being more transparent in who owns companies. So some of the companies that I named, you cannot find who owns them. Be transparent and publish the public contracts between public institutions such as ZEC and suppliers such as Renform. So you have competitive tenders, you publish the winning contract, but you also publish the losing proposals so that people can compare the price paid, and it's all online so people can check it. So transparency over contracts and transparency over payments. So where natural resource companies, oil, gas, mining companies, a frequent source of corruption, where they make payments into government, that those are all published as well so that people can track them going into the budget. And we also, make recommendations for strengthening institutions like the police and the courts. But fundamentally, this isn't a technical solution, it's a political one. And there are some big issues around the desire at the top to have change or not to have change. And these are Zimbabwean questions. So I'm going to cede the rest of my time to the Zimbabweans on the call and Honourable BT and others who know more about that.
Yes, thanks, Nick. Thanks very much. I have some notes here before Tendai comes in. Chats, one says, I believe submissions like the ones done by Nick, Donovan, and Tendai BT need to be packaged and translated into the vernacular and spread across the country so that people can have an idea as to what kind of heinous acts have been committed. We are the AA1J, and most of our people can't afford to be on these platforms. The comment is for use on this platform. Another one said, those who are corrupt and stealing must be forced to leave public office by the citizens. If the citizens are not ready to go out like they did in 2017, it means they are okay with the corruption and stealing. Everyone knows how masses express anger. In fact, ZANU-PF has led the process of expressing public anger against what they called criminals. Criminality has reached a higher level now, and citizens must do what they have done before, and the Constitution allowed them to do so. Yes, these are some of the chats, and we'll take that recommendation. Yes, we do create policy briefs out of these discussions, and we'll see how we can disseminate them through the media and through the. Now there's still a few newspapers which can still do a job, which are doing their job as they should. We should use those. But Tendai, your last words on the subject. More on what should be done. What should be done? Tendai. Tendai still there? I think Tendai is gone. Fine. Then now all I have to do is to close the meeting by just saying, first and foremost, that we need to record this.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
I told you that, this struggle against corruption, it needs international support. Same, the struggle in Zimbabwe, we were fighting against sanctions, it was international struggle. Right now, I saw a clip where a guy from Nigeria, he stole billions of dollars in Nigeria. He's over in London. He has a whole block of condominiums, right? And the Nigerian government trying to get this guy, but they can't get him. But if it was me, if I go to London and steal 50 million pounds, and run to Zimbabwe. I'll be back in London within a week. I mean, it's like I cannot steal money from the US, run to Johannesburg. I mean, they'll come and get me over there. But a lot of these guys, they steal money from Africa, they run over there to America, to London. You see?
Yeah, in fact, we had a meeting on the Africa-Europe Summit, and this came up, the extent to which the Northern Hemisphere, into which most of this loot is banked illicitly, they have not been very cooperative when African countries have been trying to get their money back. A good example is what happened over Abacha. The Swiss and even the British were dragging their feet as Nigeria tried to recover their money. Anyway, Tendai is not here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't unmute myself. I changed computers. Okay. Yeah. So on the what the gentleman is asking, you remember that about 10 years ago, the UN established what was then known as the Mbeki Commission to investigate illicit financial flows from Africa. And President Mbeki presented a very interesting report that showed that Africa loses like 89 billion, 90 billion US dollars a year from illicit financial flows. And the proposals, one of the proposals from that report was that there should be an international agreement, an international covenant of the UN against corruption and illicit financial flows, because it takes two to tango. Everything that is extracted from poor countries like Zimbabwe lands somewhere externally, whether it's in the form of Chivayo buying expensive cars from London and so forth. So that international protocol would then deal with both the supply side and demand side of corruption. But of course, there were no takers, particularly from those countries that still benefit from illicit financial. Carry
on, Tendai. Carry on.
Yeah, from illicit financial flows. So I think it's a long battle, and poor countries such as Zimbabwe and others ought to continue fighting. But coming back to the Zimbabwean question, look, we can come up with a raft of policy measures to tackle domestic corruption. One of those would include strengthening the institutions that Chennai was talking about, the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, the National Prosecuting Authority, the Zimbabwe Republic Police itself, strengthening the judiciary, having, as they have in other countries, public asset disclosures. How much what does a minister have, what does a councillor have, and you make annual declarations. One of them is coming up with a code of conduct that is envisaged by Section 298 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. But for me, the starting point must be political. There has to be change in this country. Democracy has to function, but from where we are right now, that sounds like a pipe dream. But democracy, there's no substitute for democracy. There's no substitute for creating a strong, functional state with a strong, functional economy. There's basic economics, basic research will show that where you have a growing, inclusive economy, you lessen, corruption, because corruption is largely a product of scarcity and so forth. So we need to build a strong, inclusive economy, education, social services that are normal and so forth. That will not totally eliminate corruption, but it will certainly mitigate, corruption. But where Zimbabwe is right now is very sad. As I said at the beginning, it's deep, it's entrenched, it's brazen, it's unmitigated. These guys have no shame at all. They have no shame in flaunting their corruption. They have no shame in displaying that corruption. So radical measures are required, and unfortunately, there's been no citizen agency. I was watching what was happening in Kenya in the past few days. I don't support the loss of life, but look at the reaction of ordinary Kenyans against the finance bill. And ironically, some of the things in that finance bill were actually in our own finance Act number 13 of 2024, things like the wealth tax, for instance. But Zimbabweans are indifferent, are lackadaisic, are fatalistic. We think that our fate is God created, is God given, and we must accept it. I was at a funeral yesterday, or the day before yesterday. I lost an uncle. He probably had a heart attack. He was taken to a hospital without medicine and so forth. But my relatives, they were saying, no, one of our relatives killed this man, but not the system and the failing system, not a government that gives $89 million to goats and not to drugs in medicine. So sometimes we pay the price. We get the leaders we deserve. And regrettably, that's the situation in the status quo in Zimbabwe at the present moment. But I think we shouldn't give up, and we should continue fighting and pushing.
No, thanks very much. And thanks very much. I think on that note, we call it a night, and thank the panelists, Chennai, Janet, Nick, and Tendai, all of whom have graced this platform many a time. They will do a good job. We will see how we can capture this. But remember, this is you can visit us on our website, which I've referred to earlier on, also on YouTube, and of course, I want to greet those who are on the many who are on Facebook this evening. Thank you very much. We'll keep you informed of the next